First off, I want to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. If you enjoy listening podcast summaries, please consider subscribing channel. Here is a rundown on how vaccines got politicized and the medical industry lost all credibility, featuring Mary Talley Bowden by Tucker Carlson. Mary Talley Bowden, a physician in private practice in Texas, was one of the few who got it right about COVID-19, while the U.S. public health authorities and the global public health authorities got it wrong. She shifted speaking out against the government's approach and offering alternative treatments, which led to her being attacked and her livelihood and professional credentials being threatened. Despite being vaccinated herself, Mary Talley Bowden was not afraid to challenge the status quo and speak truth to power. She was particularly concerned about the government's response to the pandemic, which she believed was driven by a desire to push people to get vaccinated rather than providing effective treatments. She pointed out that the government's PR campaign against ivermectin, a medication that she believed was safe and effective, was a clear example of this. Mary Talley Bowden's experiences during the pandemic were marked by frustration and disillusionment with the medical establishment. She was shocked by the willingness of primary care physicians to abandon their patients and refuse to treat them simply because they had a virus. She was also appalled by the hospital's refusal to allow her to treat a patient with ivermectin, despite a court order granting her emergency temporary privileges. The case of Jason Jones, a sheriff's deputy who contracted COVID-19, was particularly egregious. Mary Talley Bowden was called in to help the patient, but the hospital refused to allow her to administer ivermectin, despite the patient's desperate condition. The hospital even went so far as to tie up the patient's feeding tube to prevent his wife from sneaking in the medication. Mary Talley Bowden's efforts to help Jason Jones ultimately failed, and the patient spent 6 months in the hospital before passing away. The hospital's actions were, in her words, evil, and she was left feeling frustrated and disillusioned with the medical profession. She is accused of not having hospital privileges when she sent a nurse to the hospital to administer ivermectin to Jason Jones. However, she believes that the real reason for the charges is to silence her and punish her for speaking out against the government's approach to the pandemic. The case has been ongoing for 3.5 years with multiple continuances and a lack of expert witnesses to testify against her. The latest development is the revelation that the former medical director of the Texas Medical Board, who was set to testify against her, has been working for Planned Parenthood for the past 12 years. This has raised questions about the integrity of the medical board and the motivations of its members. Mary Talley Bowden's story is a powerful indictment of the medical establishment and the government's response to the pandemic. It highlights the need for greater transparency and accountability in the medical profession, and the importance of protecting the rights of patients and doctors to make informed decisions about their care. She believes the medical board's job is to protect the public from dangerous doctors, but in her case, she thinks she's being targeted for stepping on the toes of a multi-billion-dollar hospital, Advent Hospital. She claimed she was trying to save a life by using ivermectin, a medication that has been politicized.
Tucker Carlson, the host, asks Mary if she thinks there's any other side to the argument or any potentially legitimate justification for hounding her.
Mary responds that the medical board's role is to protect the public, but she doesn't think she's a danger to anyone. Mary shares that she was trying to save a life by using ivermectin, which she believes is effective in treating COVID-19. She mentions that there are over 100 studies showing the efficacy of ivermectin, and even in the late stages of the disease, it can decrease mortality by 40%. However, she notes that the medical establishment has been resistant to this information.
Tucker asks Mary if she's aware of any hospital in Houston that was willing to be reasonable and not take orders from the government or pharmaceutical companies.
Mary mentions Dr. Joe Verone, a pulmonologist who was willing to use ivermectin and saved many lives. She also talks about the Math Plus protocol, which includes high-dose steroids, ivermectin, and vitamin C. Mary explains that she's a data person and has looked into the safety of ivermectin. She mentions that the ELD50, a benchmark number that gauges toxicity, is much higher for ivermectin than for other medications like Tylenol. She also notes that there have been no reported cases of accidental or intentional overdoses from ivermectin.
Tucker asks Mary how the medical profession got so politicized.
Mary responds that she thinks it's because medicine has become a corporate practice, with hospitals and insurance companies having too much control over doctors. She notes that only 1% of doctors are not employed by a hospital, private equity, or the government. Mary shares that she used to work in a traditional practice but was bothered by the stranglehold that insurance companies had over her ability to treat her patients. She decided to start her own practice, which she calls third-party free, where she doesn't contract with insurance companies, hospitals, or the government. She only works for her patients.
Tucker asks Mary why she didn't get the COVID shot.
Mary explains that she had some hesitation due to the speed at which the vaccine was developed and the way the study was conducted. She also mentions that she had privileges at Houston Methodist Hospital, which required her to sign an attestation saying she would get the shot.
Mary's decision not to get the shot was a serious one, and Tucker presses her to explain why she made that choice.
Mary responds that it was more of an instinctual decision, and she was busy during that time and couldn't think straight. She also mentions that she knew early treatment worked, and she didn't think the shot was necessary. Her patients, however, fared well with COVID-19, thanks to early treatment. She had a few patients who were extremely sick, including one man with an oxygen saturation level in the 60s, but she was able to treat them successfully with high-dose steroids, antibiotics, and other medications. The conversation turned to the politicization of vaccines and the medical industry's loss of credibility. Mary Talley Bowden believes that the COVID-19 vaccine should be pulled off the market due to its high number of adverse reactions, including myocarditis and permanent immune system damage. She cited the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, which has reported 38,000 deaths from the COVID-19 vaccine.
Tucker Carlson expressed his shock and concern over the fact that 9 million American children have received the COVID-19 vaccine, despite it not being fully approved by the FDA for children under 12.
Mary Talley Bowden emphasized the importance of accountability and the need for the FDA to take action to address the issue. The conversation also touched on the topic of food and nutrition, with Mary Talley Bowden emphasizing the importance of a healthy diet and lifestyle in preventing chronic diseases. However, she noted that the COVID-19 vaccine is a more pressing concern, as it poses an imminent threat to public health. Mary Talley Bowden also discussed her concerns about the long-term effects of the COVID-19 vaccine, including the potential for cancer and immune dysfunction. She believes that the spike protein in the vaccine is oncogenic and can cause autoimmune disease and cancer. She emphasized the need for more research and testing to understand the full extent of the vaccine's effects. Mary Talley Bowden emphasized the importance of transparency and honesty in the medical community and the need for patients to be informed and empowered to make their own decisions about their health. He invites Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, a clinical physician, to share her experiences with patients who have been injured by the COVID vaccine. Dr. Bowden describes the various injuries she has seen, including strange rashes, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, and neurological tremors. She notes that these conditions are difficult to treat and that the government is not providing adequate support to those affected. Dr. Bowden explains that the COVID vaccine was developed using new technology that had not been deployed at scale before, and that the trials for the vaccine were inadequate. She expresses concern that there may be long-term consequences that have not yet manifested.
Tucker Carlson notes that the vaccine manufacturers have no liability risk, thanks to the PrEP Act, which protects them from lawsuits.
Dr. Bowden shares her experience with a patient who was injured by the vaccine and notes that the government is not providing financial reimbursement to those affected. She also mentions a lawsuit filed by a whistleblower against Pfizer, which could potentially change the liability landscape.
Tucker Carlson expresses surprise that the government is not providing more support to those injured by the vaccine and notes that the lack of transparency around medical data is a major concern.
Dr. Bowden notes that the VAERS reporting system is not being used effectively and that many cases of vaccine injury are not being reported. She also expresses concern about the lack of data on cancer rates and pediatric cancer rates, particularly in the context of the COVID vaccine.
Tucker Carlson notes that the medical industry has lost credibility and that there is a need for greater transparency and accountability.
Dr. Bowden shares her personal experience with the flu vaccine, which she says made her realize that vaccines are not always safe and effective. She notes that the flu vaccine has not been shown to decrease hospitalization or death in people who get the flu shot, and that it can actually make people more susceptible to other viruses.
Tucker Carlson shares his own experience with a child who was injured by the flu vaccine and notes that he was slow to realize that vaccines could have potential downside.
Dr. Bowden suggests that removing liability protection for vaccine manufacturers could help to put patient safety at the forefront of concern. She notes that this would require vaccine manufacturers to go through the same process as other products on the market, which would help to ensure their safety and efficacy.
Tucker Carlson notes that this is a simple solution, but wonders why it is not happening.
Dr. Bowden suggests that the lack of action may be due to the influence of the pharmaceutical industry and the fact that the PrEP Act was passed to protect vaccine manufacturers from lawsuits.
They shifted by discussing the issue of lawsuits, with Tucker expressing his dislike for lawyers and the medical industry.
Mary agreed, pointing out that if someone is repeatedly sued for the same thing, it's fair to assume there's a problem.
Tucker used the example of a person being sued multiple times for sexual harassment, suggesting that it's reasonable to question their behavior.
Mary concurred, saying that as an empiricist, she believes in looking at the evidence. The conversation then shifted to Mary's personal experience and how she plans to move forward. She mentioned that she's trying to distance herself from the controversy and focus on her patients. She also has 4 boys in high school and wants to give herself some breathing room. Despite this, she's committed to continuing to speak out and may even start a podcast.
Tucker thanked her for her time and appreciated her honesty. The conversation took a surprising turn when Tucker revealed that YouTube is suppressing his show. He expressed his disappointment and frustration, pointing out that with all the changes happening in the world, it's more important than ever to have access to accurate information. He encouraged viewers to subscribe to his channel and hit the notification bell to stay informed. By doing so, they'll have a better chance of hearing the truth and staying up to date on current events. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe, and just remember, subscription is only £1 or $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.